Hello, RoboCon. How you doing? Woo! You know, I came here to Helsinki for the first time. It is actually my first presentation at the RoboCon. And I need to say that thank you. I need to say that I've heard the greatest thing I heard from people that are actually not from Finland, but mostly from Germans, is, man, that beer is so expensive here. So, with that, I will begin my presentation. So, the presentation is called How to Create a Successful Robot Framework Project. But before we go on, how many of you are using Robot Framework for less than 1 year? Okay, between 1 and 3 years? Okay. Let me first present myself as the man, the creator, no, that comes later. So my name is Liviu. I'm coming from Romania. I'm a QA engineer for more than 15 years, and I discovered Robot Framework about 10 years ago. And since then, I've been working on projects mostly based on mobile, web, and API. And since 2020, I'm also hosting a YouTube channel called Robot Framework Tutorials. You can check it out. You have beginners tutorials then, a mobile automation tutorials, and more content to follow in 2024. The motto of the presentation is work smart, not hard. For those of us who use Robot Framework and automate on a daily basis, we know that automation should be fun. It should make life easy for us and harder for the developers. So you should have fun while building your projects, but if you do it wrong, then you will make the life harder on yourself. It's like shooting yourself in the foot. So be careful not to do it wrong. Before we start talking about how to create a successful project, we must first define what a successful project is. First, a project must be reliable. Your test cases must run smoothly, and results should reflect reality. And you should always check that there are no false positive results. What does that mean? It means that a functionality doesn't work, your code is written bad, so in the end, your test case will be passed, but the functionality would be failed. And then, reliability, we are talking about reliability when we want to test if our code is consistent throughout multiple runs. That means that if there are no third-party errors like server errors, network errors, and so on, you can have a test case that will run for 100 times and it will give the same results the 100th time also. Then there is the structure of the project. We must make sure that we structure our project in a way that we keep in mind the test cases, the suites, the resources, and every other data file we need to put into it. And by organizing a project well, we can find information rapidly once that project expands, and we need to find something as quickly as possible. Starting a project may not sound complicated, but if you have a big enough product or project, it will expand over time. So scalability and adaptability are two of the most important things you can consider, because it is guaranteed that at one point or another in your automation journey, you will have to make modifications. And the better you implement from the beginning makes it easier for you to modify afterwards. Now think about your Robot Framework project like a book. Your project is the whole book, and then you have pages, which are test suites, and then you have test cases, which are written on pages. If you take that book and you start reading it, you should have a pretty good idea of what your project is about and what are the functionalities that are being tested. So now that we know what a successful robot framework project is, let's see what we can consider and the tools that we have when we are starting such a project. The first one, and maybe the most important, is documentation, if any. Why documentation? Because in an ideal world, documentation offers the possibility to find all the features, explain all the functionalities of the app from a technical point of view and from a functional point of view. If that doesn't exist, and this is the case in most projects, I don't know about your experience, but in my experience, I've never found a project that had good documentation. They say that documentation is overrated. And in more than 15 years of QA, I have discovered the perfect definition of documentation, and I would like to share that today with you. And for that, I have a video that explains it just the way it is.
It's a fugazi, it's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's a fairy dust. It doesn't exist. It's never landed. It is no matter. It's not on the elemental chart. It's not fucking real. Right? All right? Right.
So that's documentation. So then we ask ourselves the question, if we don't have documentation and that is not a starting point, what do we do? Well, if there are no test cases either, we begin by manually testing the flows of our project and go through as many scenarios as possible. And with this, you will be able to detect the test cases that need to be implemented in order for you to automate them. And then you would easily identify the resources that you need, and most importantly, the libraries. Because you are automating on web, you need some libraries. You have some data that you parse maybe with the JSON library and so on. It's easy to have the big picture and see even patterns inside the project so you know how to create keywords later on in order not to repeat yourself. Also, you must think about the future of the product. If you have a product that is only beginning and you know where they want to go, you can start from the right way. And again, we're talking about scalability to make it easier for yourself on the long run. And now I'll be talking about something that I've seen in some projects and something that I experienced myself. Sometimes in projects, because there is no documentation and maybe there are no test cases in that area, you find yourself with a functionality that you don't know if it's running correctly or not. And most often this functionality is one of the less used. So you automate it like that. And one day, a client comes along and says, that doesn't work. And you say, but our tests are good. It works. So you discover you have automated it the wrong way when it should have been a bug all along. So if you are not sure about the functionality of a certain piece, just go ask the product owner or somebody who is in charge of the project. Now, let's look at some good practices in automation. The first and maybe the most important is that each test case should be independent. It makes it easier to verify functionalities if one test does not rely on another test. That means that if you have a suite containing 20 tests and they are all connected to each other, at one point, if one test fails, all the other functionalities will not get tested because your suite will not move on. Also, you should know your input and your output data. What do you want to test, and what is the outcome that you want to obtain? And then, one other important advantage of this is that it makes it possible to run your tests in a completely random order and also run them by functionality, let's say. Think about your automation project as being a kitchen with cabinets. If we think about our kitchen at home, what do we have? We have cabinets, we have tools, we have food, ingredients mostly. So each time you are creating an automation script, you take ingredients from cabinets, you put them together, you make a recipe, and that's your test case. How do you do it naturally? You know which ingredient is where. So having an approach like this saves you time. And one other good thing about this and about Robot Framework, because it's so flexible, no two kitchens are the same. So once you have found the right cabinets for you to place your test cases, your prerequisites, and so on, you can move on. You can give the same project to two people. They will implement it differently, but there is no correct or wrong way of doing it once you establish something as a pattern. So here I have a brief example of a project where you can specify some resources, and then you should divide those resources maybe by functionality, and then you would have tests. Here I have an example where you have test cases for mobile and for web, and then the mobile tests are divided into functionalities and so on. Now, let's talk about keywords. There were a lot of talks yesterday and today about keywords, about good practices. So basically, this is going to be a repetition. But the important thing is that all the ones who talked about keywords before had roughly the same idea. The use of Selenium library here is not just to annoy René. It also has a functional scope. So we should create keywords for everything. In this example, we have two keywords, go to login page and go to register page. If we observe closely, here we have a pattern. I couldn't have used browser library here because they don't have weights. They are way smarter, but anyway. So these two keywords are a pattern, and we are going to use them a lot throughout an automation project on web with Selenium. So why repeating these keywords over and over again when we could do something like this? Create a keyword for the waiting and clicking, and then have that keyword referred into other keywords. It makes it easier to clean the code. And then we have variables. I mostly use variables on locators when it comes to web or mobile automation. And the reason I do that is because in my early times of automation, I didn't know anything about web automation. I didn't know anything about Robot Framework. And when I started automating, I took a project from somebody and I continued hard-coding values. And I just hard-coded. And a few months later, they said, we are going to change the UI. And at that point, it took me 2.5 months to identify all the locators that were hard-coded inside files, put variables on them, and continue from there. So instead of this, you can have this. And now you can use that variable in all the test cases where you need it. Next, you should use comprehensive names for variables. What's bad about this example here is that it's very generic. And I promise you that once your project begins to grow and you start splitting resources and tests and suites and so on, you won't know what that locator is for, what button, and what it does. So a better alternative in this case, and this is my pattern that I use, is use the location of that element, in this case, item page. I know that is a button, and it is a button to add an item. Also, the same principle applies to keywords. If you have a keyword that's called add item, when your resource file will get to 2,000 or 3,000 lines, I will wish you good luck finding it and remembering what that does. So instead, you should have something like add item to cart from items page. Again, you know where that keyword exists and what it does. And don't create keywords that hard code arguments either. In this example, we have a keyword that can also be used for one item. And it's a shame not being able to reuse your data once you have worked so hard in constructing it. So instead, you would have an argument, and this makes it universal. This makes it possible for you to call it out in all the tests you need. One other problem in web automation and also mobile automation is the use of sleeps. Not only it is a bad practice, but it also increases your execution time dramatically. So instead of sleep, you should find something that works best. Like in this case, we should wait until the element is visible on the page and then click it. And again, browser library doesn't have this problem, so less code for you. And final chapter, some tips and tricks for a successful project. If we see this example, we have to define a keyword that maybe creates a new user. This can be done through the API or through the UI. I know it's not a good practice to have multiple arguments for a keyword, but sometimes that's just the way things are. So in this case, you have a keyword that requires 7 arguments. But you know that in 90% of the cases, you don't need to modify the last 4. So what you could do instead of this is this. Have a dictionary with some values that are implicit, and once you call out the keyword, you only have to give it 3 arguments. And if at one point you need to modify one of them, you just say, for example, CT equal, and you modify that value for that variable. High-level keywords are preferred in automation, and it might sound weird when I say you can create high-level keywords from low-level keywords that are in the libraries, even if that keyword is 1 row. Here we have an example where a keyword is created to wait for an element to be displayed on a page and then input some text, and another one for clicking a web element. Now let's say at this point we are using Selenium library and we want to move to browser. Because there is no input text or click element inside the test cases, that means we are not forced to modify any keywords in the test cases, but we only need to modify them in the higher level keywords that are using those. So basically, we won't be touching the already created test cases, we will only touch the resources. And then this becomes that. So no low-level keywords in your high-level keywords and in your tests. In order to assure that we have a good organization of keywords and a good creation of keywords, I refer to something on my YouTube channel called the what and the how. How do you know when and how to create good keywords? Well, you ask yourself the question, what do I want to do? I want to log in with the user. How do I do that? Well, first I input the username, then I input the password, and then I submit the login. Didn't have an extra row to validate the login, so we'll just skip that. And then the input username becomes the what. what do I want to do? I want to input the username. How do I do it? I fill text in a checkbox, in a text field, sorry. So as you go lower and lower inside a high-level keyword, you will always end up having the low-level keywords at the bottom. And I said in the beginning that your robot framework project should be like a book and easy to read. Now, if you would have a test case like this will probably be comprehensive for technical people, but it will not be comprehensive for somebody who hasn't seen automation in his life, and especially somebody who doesn't know what a web locator is. So if we apply all the principles that we already discussed, this mess can become this. And this is now a story that can be read much easier. It takes less space, and it's more beautiful to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Liviu. Questions? And while we wait, what's your YouTube channel?
Robot Framework Tutorials.
Go and subscribe. Let's take, there's at least one question in the back. From Tatu, my nemesis.
Yes,
I know, sir.
vote for me and not for him. But anyway, do you have a lot of keywords and variables, and are you sometimes lost in the forest of the keywords and variables? And how, if you are, how you deal with that?
I have created resource files for specific functionalities of my app that I'm testing right now. And all the keywords and the variables that are for that functionality, I keep them into that file. And I also apply the same rule I showed here. So the variables get a prefix in the name stating the area where that locator is. And then in that resource file, the keyword has a name that starts with the functionality itself. So it's the same principle, not to get lost. And I also write a lot of my keywords when I create test cases. I also write them manually before the editor starts suggesting things. And this way, writing them manually at all time, or beginning to write them manually, it's easier because you don't forget about the names of your keywords.
Then there's a question in the back.
Yeah, thank you for a very good presentation. This is a content and everybody here should kind of memorize and use every day at work. One challenge what I see with these things is that when in the organization we have this kind of cross-competence teams where we have developers, test automation, testers, whatever, together, it seems to be for me that in some organizations there's usually a lead developer who is deciding the methods to be used on behalf of the test automation experts. And they seem to be tending towards the programming language they use, and then you end up with this kind of a complex test cases, like the bad example you had at the end. So I would recommend everybody here who is a test automation expert to keep their head and say no to these guys that are thinking about just their box and not the whole organization. Because when you are doing the test automation, you are not just for the developers, but everybody in the project. And it should be in the business language.
Thank you.
There's one question from Rene.
I must say, I absolutely, totally, 100% agree with some of your content.
Except the last slide with thank you, right? And questions.
No, just kidding. Mostly, I'm fine. Maybe a comment to the selectors and the variables.
Yeah.
I must say, I would disagree on that point. when you have a proper communication between the developers and the test automation engineers, and you get test IDs in your test, because then you would just add another abstraction or another layer of complexity with all these curly braces and stuff. If the selector itself is proper, readable, and explainable what it's doing, I totally agree. Once you start doing XPath and so on, just hide it in a naming variable. That's perfect. I think you brought up many good points, and one point I want to point out here is this kind of usage of library keywords that someone else is in possession of. Specifically, for example, for browser library, because we do a lot of breaking changes from here and then. So sometimes we deprecate a keyword and say you should use something else because we want to be modern and up to date. And if you use a keyword 100 times in your code, then you have to fix 100 things. And this one keyword to be called and then used 100 times is a good thing with the abstraction layer. And if anyone is interested how good that person did this, for example, with his own project, her own project with Selenium library, for example, you can approach me in the breaks and I can give you a statistic tool that will tell you not only how often a keyword X is used, but also in how many parents it's called. And when you see that click element is used like 5,000 times and 5,000 times parents, then it's maybe not the right abstraction layer. And I think this is, for these things, we could maybe also make more analytics. Any comments on that also?
I think you are right.
and thank you.
We have time for one more question if there's one. Then we'll just thank Liviu.
Thank you.
Awesome presentation.